Robin, how many authors do you think we've spoken to since we started doing this show? 16 years ago.
Yeah, a lot, thousands, sure.
And we got a lot of books sent to us, right?
Yeah.
And I do read a lot of the books. This one I'm buying. Mm-hmm. This one just is right up my alley. I love this kind of stuff. I don't know if that makes me a geek or not, but our next guest is anything but a geek. He's a Pulitzer Prize winning author. Jack E. Davis has written the book called The Gulf, The Making of America's Sea. I think I'm reading it right. It's kind of small print right there. And he is, in addition to a Pulitzer Prize winning author, he's a professor of environmental history at the University of Florida. So even in our listening audience, I don't know if he's there right now.
Go Gators.
The Making of an American Sea, The Gulf. You know, good morning, Jack Davis. It's an honor to have you on our show. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, and thanks for having me.
Where are you? Where are you calling from?
I am calling from New Hampshire.
Oh, what are you doing up there?
Okay, all right, I confess. I'm a bit indulgent. I spend my summers up here. I grew up in Florida. I'm smart enough to get away from the summer if I possibly can.
All right, so here's what the introduction I did was one I was thinking about doing, and then I had another idea for the introduction. I wanted to say that when I was a kid, I would, because I'm from New York, and I would visit my grandparents here in Florida. And when we'd go to the Gulf of Mexico, it felt like I could walk out a mile or two without ever even reaching my waist. It seemed so shallow. I don't know where we went, but I remember my grandfather liked what do you call those things? Mussels? Yeah. So he'd always get mussels and stuff like that. You know, the shellfish mussels. Yeah. He wasn't a bodybuilder. But anyway, yeah. So you have a book that helps us understand how the Gulf of Mexico was made.
Yes, that's part of the book. That's the opening part of the book, and that shallow water you talk about is very common around the Gulf of Mexico. That's the continental shelf you're walking on, and if you know, thousands of years ago, a couple of thousand years ago, maybe 3,000, you might have been able to walk as far as 60, 70 miles out to what was then the edge of the beach.
Wow.
The what of the beach? What is that?
The edge of the beach. The edge. That was the shoreline a few thousand years ago was 70, 80 miles out in today's Gulf of Mexico, and that's the continental shelf. But that was the old beach out there, and people lived out there as well with megafauna and mastodons, saber-toothed cats, giant ground sloths, and giant armadillos. Not the kind that we see on the roadside dead these days, but
really?
So-called prehistoric armadillo. Yeah.
Oh my God, this is such an interesting topic. I have a question. This is going to come out of left field. This is a memory from those days when I was a little kid. Every once in a while, you'd be in the Gulf, and it was kind of warm water, and every once in a while there'd be a bunch of cold water that just came by, and somebody said, and I don't want to give credit to the wrong person, but somebody said that the water that is in the aquifer has springs, just like Rainbow Springs and Silver Springs, and some of those springs actually show up underneath the Gulf of Mexico, and that's what that is. Have you ever heard that?
Yes, that could have been possibly what you were feeling with spring water coming up. There are also inshore currents that might have been bringing in some cooler water.
Oh, wow.
But depending on where you were, yeah. If you were up closer to the Big Bend area, up towards the central part of the peninsula, you might have been encountering springs. Yeah,
that is so awesome. You don't think about that, right? You don't think of that, a spring actually underneath water in water, kind of. So tell me, how do you study this? How does somebody like yourself even begin to study this? I mean, the only way I could do it would be to read your book, for example. but how do you write the book? How do you get there to that point?
Well, that's a really good question because when I first conceived the topic, I wasn't sure how to get there, and then the BP oil spill happened, and I realized immediately this book was not going to be about the BP oil spill because that has dominated the headline news throughout the summer of 2010, and it had robbed the Gulf of its true identity, and so with this book, I wanted to reclaim that identity, but using the natural characteristics to organize the story of the Gulf of Mexico, not to allow human events to guide the narrative, incorporate them into the narrative, because we love reading about other people, right, and their adventures. But so I organized the book around natural characteristics of the Gulf: fish, birds, beaches, rivers, barrier islands, and weather, hurricanes, for instance. And so that gave me my organizing foundation for the book. And then within that, I weaved in these human stories. These are some interesting people.
And I love the fact that you state human beings are only passing through. That is such a profound statement.
I'm sure we are, yeah.
Yeah, and that's something we should keep in mind, I think, sometimes, and because our period on Earth will not ultimately be very long, as in the case with anything in the history of the Earth, and so I think it makes sense for us to obviously protect that environment that supports us, that supports human life. We all benefit when that happens.
The subtitle, "The Making of an American Sea," brings another thing to my memory. I remember when I first started living here, somebody say, "I'm going to the beach," and I would say, "Are you going to the ocean or the Gulf?" And they would say, "Well, they're both oceans." And then I would say, "Oh, okay. I thought the Atlantic was an ocean and the Gulf was a Gulf." But I think my position, I don't even know if that is a position, but what I always thought was typical of a Yankee, of me, of people who came, right? And the people who grew up here, both sides were the ocean. They're both oceans, right?
Well, we refer to them both as seas, and they are both seas. That's the more generic term than ocean.
Okay.
But in the taxonomy of seas on Earth, you have oceans, which are the largest, and then you have seas, and then you have gulfs. And so, and that's just, there are rule breakers in there. There are some seas that are smaller than gulfs. There are some gulfs that, but there's nothing larger than an ocean.
Okay. So tell me about the study. Does the Gulf of Mexico have characteristics that are different than any other body of water on Earth?
Well, here's some. It has some outstanding characteristics. We'll put it that way. It's one of the richest estuarine environments in the world. So there are some 200 estuaries that circle the Gulf of Mexico, and those estuaries are responsible for producing one of the most productive commercial seafood fisheries in the nation. Sometimes outperforming the entire east coast of the United States. From New England all the way down to South Florida, and it is a shallow sea, and averages only about a mile deep, and therefore the water is typically warmer than other bodies, and but that warm water is what often attracts, draws Atlantic hurricanes into the Gulf of Mexico.
So all the fresh water that pours into the Gulf of Mexico, does it change the salinity of? Is that the right word? Salinity, whatever. It's a salt.
Yes. I'm glad you brought that up because that's very important because those estuaries would not exist without that fresh water. You need to have just the right balance between salt water and fresh water, and that fresh water comes from rivers. And 85% of this fresh water that flows to the Gulf of Mexico comes out of the 5 U.S. states. So we are fortunate to have this great, wonderful concentration of estuaries in the northern Gulf. Mexico and the U.S. and Cuba share the Gulf of Mexico shoreline, but the United States gets the greater benefit of that estuarine environment.
When the Spanish people first came over and they were mapping and charting everything, did the currents within the Gulf make it difficult for them to do the charts?
Oh my gosh! It foiled them time and again. There's one. There was a 1528 Spanish expedition that embarked from Cuba and was trying to make its way to Veracruz, Mexico, and ended up in Tampa.
Oh my!
Because of those, because of those currents. Navigation was not nearly as sophisticated then as it is today, and it was easy to get lost. But that's really getting lost. The Americans, the British and the Americans were really the ones who did the most precise charting of the Gulf of Mexico. And not only did currents foil them or fool them, but also because the shoreline of the Gulf of Mexico is there's not always this clear divide between water and land, because you have mangrove forests, you have these wonderful coastal marshlands, which are estuaries, particularly around Louisiana and the Big Bend of Florida and Texas, and so it's very hard to distinguish between the true divide between land and water in those sort of places. But also sandbars in the shallow water foiled them as well. They didn't run up on rocks, but they ran up on a lot of sandbars when they were trying to chart the Gulf.
Jack E. Davis is our guest. His book is called The Gulf, The Making of an American Sea. It is a study of the Gulf of Mexico. I have a political question about the Gulf of Mexico, and it's not that heavy political. It's just the lines. Are there any international waters in the Gulf of Mexico?
Oh, yes. The U.S. Territory or water territory only reaches out to 3 miles out in the Gulf of Mexico, and that's true with the other nations around the Gulf of Mexico. So those are international waters out in the center of the Gulf.
Really? Okay.
Yes. And so there are a lot of Japanese fishers that come to the industrial fishing boats or fishing ships come into the Gulf and fish in those international waters.
Wow.
And they do significant harm as well, because they're pretty ruthless about coming in and taking everything that they can get.
Well, maybe
and
that is a perfect place for me to ask my next question. Who, if anybody, governs the international water part of the Gulf of Mexico, or is it just free for all?
Well, of course, within our territory, the Coast Guard, of course, is in charge of protecting those waters. And but international waters is really by international agreement. There is no international police force, if you will, or water patrol out there ensuring people follow agreements between countries and treaty agreements and such.
Were there different cultures in Florida after Columbus was here that no longer exist today? I mean, we hear about the Creeks and the Seminoles, but were there other cultures?
Preceding the Spanish, and continuing to exist after Columbus and others made it to the New World. There were numerous cultures around the Gulf of Mexico, and it's hard to say what the total human population was before Juan Ponce de Leon discovered Florida for the Europeans. But maybe as many as 400,000 people around what is today the 5 U.S. states, and these people had been around for thousands of years, for 8 to 10,000 of years, and they shocked the Spanish because they were physically robust, they were taller than the Spanish, and they took the majority of their protein from those estuaries that I mentioned earlier. Very healthy people.
Does the study of the Gulf give us some a better way maybe to protect it, environmentally speaking?
I hope so. And that was one of my goals, and to bring this awareness to this wonderful sea that Americans don't know a lot about. And they when they think of the Gulf of Mexico, they think of an oil sump often, or they think of a place that's racked by hurricanes or vacation land. And I wanted Americans to know that the sea has this rich and wonderful history, and that we're all connected. All Americans are connected, both historically and ecologically, to the Gulf of Mexico. So it doesn't, as I say in my book, it doesn't require much for us to protect the Gulf of Mexico. Gives a lot, and it has given a lot to us over the years. It's a giving sea, and that's okay to take from it, but we just need to give a little bit back to it. It doesn't ask for much, and that's our respect for what makes it a living, giving sea, and that's primarily to keep those estuaries healthy.
Do you think the bridge builders did a good job in building the bridges with the materials they used to preserve the areas of the Gulf, like from Tampa to St. Pete and Tampa to Clearwater?
Well, the bridge builders, meaning actual engineers. Are you talking about a physical bridge that we drive across?
Yes.
Or you're talking? Oh, okay.
The physical.
Well,
bridges.
There are mixed consequences that come with building bridges. Yes, they give us access, and the bridge builders can build some pretty sturdy bridges, but they have a tremendous impact on those estuaries. One, they disrupt the currents, and the other is that they have ended up creating a very heavy development on barrier islands, which serve a purpose other than just providing a place for people. And there are a lot of engineering projects all around the Gulf of Mexico, and they have been very disruptive. And of course, to those estuarine environments, and early engineers didn't realize the consequences of what they were doing, but when you change the currents by putting in a jetty, by cutting an inlet, by cutting a channel for shipping, building a bridge or a causeway, you disrupt those currents, but also in the process of construction, you end up wreaking havoc with those estuaries.
We have a trail here. You're probably familiar with it, the Marjorie Harris Carr Trail. I don't know what the rest of the name is, but
Greenway, yeah, the Marjorie Harris Carr Greenway, yeah.
And we know her as the lady to thank for stopping the Cross Florida Barge Canal. Give us a little bit of science about that. What would have happened had that thing been built?
Well, what would have happened is you would have had more disruption of the inshore currents, and because you would have had shipping going across the state of Florida and coming up through a constructed area of the Florida Peninsula, and so you would have had to have shipping channels cut. When you have that, not only do you disrupt the estuarine environment through the construction, but you also increase the chances of some sort of toxic spills in those areas. To give you an example, the Houston Ship Canal, which obviously is in Houston, runs from Houston to Galveston. We would have had something similar to that if we had the Cross Florida Barge Canal. And that has caused a lot of damage to Galveston Bay. Galveston Bay suffers some nearly 300 toxic spills a year because of that shipping channel. The Cross Florida Barge Canal probably wouldn't have been destructive because we don't have the petrochemical industry over here, but I think that Cross Florida Barge Canal would have promoted more industrial development in the area and increased shipping.
Well, and just as Marjorie Harris Carr is a hero, your book also talks about some heroes and some villains, that names I don't know. I was just looking at the little information we have here, so I'm looking forward to reading the whole book. Can you spotlight some of the heroes or even a villain if you want that had an influence one way or the other on the Gulf?
Yes, I can name a couple. One who's one of the most interesting people in the book, I think, is Edward Avery McElhaney, whose father invented Tabasco sauce on Avery Island. And Edward, the son, has turned the Tabasco into what it is today. And you can visit the Tabasco factory on Avery Island, Louisiana today. It's a beautiful place. But Edward Avery McElhaney was also an early bird conservationist in the 19th century when he noticed many of the egrets, most of the egrets are disappearing. They become targets of the women's hat fashion industry for their feathers. Yeah. And so Edward Abram McElhaney established these bird sanctuaries that became some of the earliest, if not the earliest, bird sanctuaries in the country that became models for others. Another one in the 20th century is Diane Wilson over on the Texas coast, who was a shrimper from a long-time shrimping family, was a shrimper herself, ran a fish house on Lavaca Bay in Texas, which was surrounded by all sorts of industrial plants that were polluting Lavaca Bay and destroying the livelihood of these shrimpers and making the waters in Lavaca Bay and elsewhere along the Texas coast unswimmable in some places. And she fought these companies, got them to clean up their act. It did not hurt them economically. They're all still thriving in the Lavaca Bay area, Calhoun County, and the waters are much cleaner today. So we can recreate, and we can they can still shrimp there.
Yeah, and hopefully that's the direction we're going with every environmental issue in this country. The waters that I grew up around are cleaner now than they were when I was a kid. The Hudson River, for example, out of New York, it's considerably better. That's what they say anyway.
I'm very happy.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. It doesn't hurt the economy. Everybody benefits from clean water.
And I'm very happy that the Mayans, they didn't settle here in Florida on the West Coast and just kept moving toward Mexico, because I think it wouldn't be like it is today with all their structures they built.
You're right. It would not have been like it is today. The structures that were built by the native peoples here were these giant shell mounds, and they surrounded the entire Gulf Coast, almost shoulder to shoulder, which was indicative of how robust the marine life was in the Gulf of Mexico at the time.
We went to one of those shell mounds in Crystal River, remember?
Yeah. It's huge. Huge.
Jack, I have loved this interview. I'm going to love the book. I found it on Amazon. Looks like you're getting really good reviews. Do you have a website set up for the book or for your writing?
Well, you can find I've got my faculty website at the University of Florida, but it doesn't focus so much on my writing. It does include it, but you can go to the W.W. Norton website, which is my publisher, to get more information about the book and myself. And you can buy it as you did online, and you can buy it on land as well.
I like that.
And your book did win the Pulitzer Prize, and that is, a huge accomplishment.
Well, he won the
Thank you.
Pulitzer.
Yes, he did, for the book.
Well, for the book. It's all about, and it's about the Gulf of Mexico too, right? Positive attention press for the Gulf of Mexico.
The book also got another award. Just real quickly, what was it called again? It was called the
Kirkus Award.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Jack, thank you for doing that, and I think I'm going to get a summer home up in the colder states. I'm going to be the opposite of a snowbird. No, that would be a snowbird, wouldn't it? Yes. That's what I want to be.
Yes.
All right, Jack, thank you for being on the air. Good luck with everything.
My pleasure, and thank you.
All right, we'll be right back.
The weather is brought to you by myfwc.com. Safe boating is no accident. And this Wednesday, intervals of clouds and sunshine with a thunderstorm in parts of the area. It'll be mainly during the afternoon hours over the interior, the high 87 to 91. For Wednesday night, partly to mostly cloudy with a thunderstorm in spots early, low 73 to 77. Thursday, intervals of clouds and sunshine with a thunderstorm in the area, high 89 to 93. Friday, clouds and some sun with a thunderstorm, high 89 to 93. From the Florida Weather Center, I'm Joe Lundberg.
This is James Snyder, inviting you to join me each Sunday morning at 9:30 for Sunday Joy on 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, WOCA, The Source.
Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
Fox News Radio, I'm Chris Foster. Parents and children separated after entering the country illegally are ordered to be reunited by a federal judge in California.